John chapter 19, verses 1 to 15. The Jews ask to crucify Jesus. Begins in verse 1. Tote un eleven o Pilatos ton isun. Then therefore Pilate took Jesus, ke emastigose, and whipped him. This word whipped is only in John. In Matthew 27:26 and Mark 15:15 is called to scourge, which is a way worse than being whipped. Scourging someone was hitting them with the straps with little pieces of metal on the end and so forth that tore the skin, where being whipped would be just with like a switch or some type of a strap of sort. But he was gone through this torture, now being whipped. And then it's this, and it says, though, in other places, it was after the release of Barabbas. In Barabbas, it says in Luke 2:19, was a murderer, not just a robber. He could have done both. But it mentions, I think, a robber in John, but a murderer in Luke 2:19. And at that time in Luke 23:22, it says, and having corrected him then, I will release him. Instead of whip him or to scourge him, Luke has that he will correct him. A little bit different. When you put all these together like I'm trying to do, it gives us way more information. In verse 2, ke stratiote plexantes Stephanon ex akanthon, and the soldiers, having plaited a crown from out of thorns, Stephanon, we have the word Stephen, a crown. They apethikon av tu tikepali, they placed it upon his head, ke imation porphyrun perievalon afton, and a cloak of purple they clothed him. The crown of thorns, acanthos, some type of a thorny bush that they could take to pieces and weave them around, make some type of a crown to torture Jesus. It says that it was in a cloak of porphyrun, of purple. The purple is used for royalty, basically, or somebody's very, very important. And it says in Mark 15:20, and when they mocked him, they took the purple off of him. Porphyros 42:09. And so the purple, for the royalty, I have a Bible over here I picked up when I went to Greece maybe 15 years ago, ended up on the island of Patmos, spent 3 or 4 days in the monastery of St. John the Theologian, and there they had the Purple Codex, which was, 150 so pages. They had 32 leaves from the original. The rest of them were in St. Petersburg, and one of them was in the library at London, the British Library, British Museum, and a couple of pages in private parties owned. And so I was able to go down because I gave them one of the Apostolic Bibles, and they thought it was really wonderful. Somebody did something like that and allowed me to stay there. And I said, is there anything you'd like to see? And I said, I'd like to see the Purple Codex, which is the first gospel in existence. And it could very well have been Justinian's copy. We don't know that, but it was on vellum, which was like a leather, and it was written, dyed in purple, and the letters were in silver. Whenever it had Jesus or Theos, God, it was in gold. And I picked up, I'll go get it and show it to you here. I can hardly lift it up anymore. I don't know what it weighs, 20 pounds, probably. I hauled this all the way from Greece on the island of Patmos on the ferries to the airport, up to Seattle, took a train, and then came back to Newport. Here's the inside of the case, and there is what the monastery was put together along with the museum in St. Petersburg of the Purple Codex. It says right at the top, the Porphyry Codex. Now here's the Bible inside that box, and if you open it up, you will see the pages are all, it's sort of a purple tint to them. And so this was possibly Justinian's copy, and I got to pick up a page in my hands, the oldest gospel in existence in the world, maybe a couple hundred years after Jesus. And inside of that box, underneath that book, is this one right here. See, there it says the Purple Porphyry Codex. And inside of this is the same thing in modern Greek, as far not, it's the same thing, but it's just easier to read in the typography is still the same Greek. It's just easier to read because it was done on a computer. So, purple for the royalty, and this is what they put on Jesus. They clothed him with this. Now, in Song of Solomon, it says, "And the braid of your head is as purple, the king being bound by its passing by." The king tied in to the purple in songs. And then in Daniel, it says in 5 verses 7 and 16 that purple garments should be put on Daniel if he could describe the dream, interpret the dream. And then in Matthew 27:29 at this time, it says, "And a reed they put in his right hand." So they put the purple on him, the crown on his head, and a reed in his hand like he is the emperor. K. Elegon said, "Here, O vasiles ton Iudeon, hail, King of the Jews," mocking him. In Matthew 27:29, it says, "And having knelt before him, they mocked him, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews,'" a little bit different. But then in verse 30, it says, "And having spit on him, they took the reed and beat upon his head." So he's going through all of this. And then in Matthew 26:67, it says, "And they spat in his face and buffeted him, and some slapped." So he's there in front of all of these soldiers, and they're tormenting him for who he said he was and making fun of him and so forth. Then it says, "Ke edidun avto or aptismata," and they gave him slaps. In verse 4, "Exilthan un palin exo o Pilatos." Pilate came forth then again outside. So he was inside of his, in the praetorium, inside on his whatever, sitting on something. And so he goes outside, and legi ke legi aftis, and says to them, "Ide ago imin afton exo," I bring him to you outside. "Ina genote oti in afto udamian etian evrisco," that you should know that in him not one fault I find. Innocent, innocent, innocent. John 18:38, no fault he was found, but in Matthew 27:24, Pilate says, "I am innocent of the blood of this righteous one. You will see to it." And having responded, all the people said, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." And the curse was put on the Jews by their forefathers at the crucifixion of Jesus. And I believe they are still cursed today. In verse 5, Exilthen un o Isus exo. Jesus then came forth outside, foron ton akanthinon, Stephanon, ke to porphyron, imation, ke legi aftis. Ide, o anthropos, says to them, behold the man. So he's wearing this crown and doing all these things that they soldiers put on him. He goes outside, all the people are there, and they're saying to crucify him, crucify him. In the next verse, but now he's in front of them. It says, Ote un idon afton I archiaris ke I perete, and then when the chief priests and the officers beheld him in the sad shape, ekravgasen, they cried out, legonta, saying, Stavroson, Stavroson afton, crucify him, crucify him. And so the Jews instigated the crucifixion. Pilate, we'll see, allows it, but the Jews wanted him to be crucified. And the Jews torment him, slap him, and then end up trying to kill him. It says in Luke 23:21 and 22, they said, crucify him, crucify him. And the third time he said to them, as Pilate, 3 times, for what evil did this one do? No fault for death do I find in him. And they pressed with great voices, asking for him to be crucified. And their voices prevailed, and of the chief priests. So the Jews today like to think that the Romans were the ones that were at fault. No, the whole thing was that they were at fault. The Jews, beginning to the very end, their soldiers were there. They were it wasn't the Romans that took him, we'll find out. It was, Pilate gave him over to the officers of the Jews. They take him and crucify him. And then at the inside of the tomb, we'll find out later, it wasn't the Romans that were there. Even though movies show that, it wasn't. It was their military from the high priest. The Matthew 27:22, they say, Pilate says, what then shall I do with Jesus, the one being called Christ? And they say to him, let him be crucified. Over and over that this is what they want. And then Pilate says here, legi aftis o Pilatos, lavate afton imis, ke stavrosate. Take him yourselves and crucify. So he's allowing them to crucify Jesus, not going to do it himself. Ego gar uk evrisko en afto etian. For I do not find fault in him. So Pilate wanted to get away from what they were doing, but it didn't work out that way. And then in verse 7, apokrithi son afto o iudei. The Jews responded then, emis nomon echomen, and we have a law, ke kata ton nomon imon, ophili apothanin, oti iafton ion theu episan. And according to our law, he ought to die, for he made himself a son of God, which he did. But he was. Ote un ikusen o Pilatos tutun ton logon. Then when Pilate heard this word, malon ephovithi, more he feared. Now, it doesn't say any place earlier about him fearing, but apparently he did, and he was in a bad spot in front of all these people, having to do something that he didn't really want to do. In verse 9, ke isilthan isto praetorian palin, and he entered into the praetorium again. So he's telling these people, why are we doing this and killing him? And And so he goes back inside. Ke legi to Isu, and he apparently brings Jesus inside. Pothen isi, from what place are you? O the Isus apokrison uk edoken afto. But Jesus gave not an answer to him. Legiun afto o Pilatos, then says Pilate to him, Emi ulalis? To me you speak not? Ukidas oti exousian echo stavrosi say? Have you not known that I have authority to crucify you? Ke exousian echo apolise say, and I have authority to release you. Apokrithi o Isus, and Jesus answered, Ukachis exousian udemian kademu. You have not an authority or anything against me. Imi in si the domenon anothen, except what was given to you from above. Viatuto o paradidus me si mizona amartian eki. On account of this, the one delivering me up to you has the greater sin. Now here you can, people can have a couple of different opinions. The one delivering me up to you, and he's talking about God has the power. So is he talking about God as delivering him up, having the greater sin as far as, yes, Jesus is dying for sin of the world, but he will rise up from the dead? Or is it talking about the Jews delivering me up that has the greater sin? Well, it says the one delivering me up, which leads me sort of to believe he's talking about the Father here. I might be wrong on that, because if it was the Jews, I would think it would be plural. In verse 12, ek tutu aziti o Pilatos apolise afton. From this, Pilate sought to release him. Again, he's trying to release him. Ide iudei ekrazon, but the Jews cried out, legontes, and tuton apolisis, if this one you should release, uk e philos to Caesaros, you are not a friend of Caesar. And he is working for Caesar as a consul. Pas o vasolea iavton pion antilegi to Caesari. All making himself king speaks against Caesar. Un Pilatos, so this is really hypocritical of them. They hate the Romans. They've fought against them to get rid of them. But yet here, when they want their way, they say that anybody making himself king speaks against Caesar. Well, they're speaking more against Caesar than anybody. In verse 13, O Pilatos acusas tuton ton logon, then Pilate, hearing this word, igagon exo ton is soon, brought Jesus outside. So now he goes out again, and ke ekathison epi to vimatos is topon legomenon lithostraton. And he sat upon the rostrum of some type of a raised area with a chair in the place called lithostraton, lithostratus. Now, this is very interesting. In Songs 3:10, it says, his columns he made of silver, and his couch of gold. This would possibly Solomon. His step purple, within it, an agape lithostratos from the daughters of Zion. So it mentions this lithostratos in the Song of Solomon. And then we see here at 7:3 in the Old Testament, Ke Pontus ii Israel Aaron katavenon to Pir. All the sons of Israel, having seen the fire come down and the glory of the Lord upon the house. This is Second Chronicles and 7:3. And this is where they dedicated the house that Solomon built. So the people are seeing fire come down, and the glory of the Lord upon the house. So here is a wonderful thing, this new temple, and the glory of the Lord comes down upon the house. And they fell upon their face, upon the ground, upon the stone, the lithostraton, the stone pavement, but it could have been the same place where Jesus is now being condemned, where earlier he's on a place that the Spirit came down. And then it says, Ivraisti they Gavatha, but in Hebrew, Gabatha. In verse 14, in the Paraskevi to Pascha, and it was preparation of the Passover. Ora they osi ekti, about the 6th hour. Now the 6th hour in Jewish time would be noon, and the Roman time would be 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's probably the noon. Ke legitis iudeis, and he says to the Jews, Ide o vasilef Simon, behold your king. Ide ekravgasin, and they cried out, Aron, Aron, Stavroson, Avton, take him, crucify him. Legiavtis o Pilatos, ton vasilea imon Stavroso, shall I crucify your king? Apokrythison e archiaris. The chief priests answered, this is the head of the clergy in Israel. Uk echomen vasilea imi Caesara. We have not a king except Caesar. Again, the hypocrisy of the Jews, claiming Caesar to be their king who they hated, just so they could kill a righteous man. Tote un paredoken afton aftis. This is important. And then, therefore, he delivered him, Jesus, up to them, not himself. He didn't take his own soldiers. At least here in John. I didn't check all the other ones for that, but I'll find out the next video. In a stavrothi, to them that he should be crucified. Perelavon, they ton isun ke igagon, and they took Jesus and led him. So it was apparently from here, it was the soldiers or the people from the officers from the high priest that take Jesus. Like I said, I'll have to check with the other Gospels and make sure that they don't say the Romans, but here it doesn't. The next section is the crucifixion.